Contrary to what Christian propaganda claims, animal sacrifice is not part of Satanism. We'll explore rule number 10 of the 11 Satanic Rules of the Earth and what it means for Satanists in this episode of Satansplain.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain. Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Magister Bill M here with Satansplain. At the time of this recording, it is the week of Thanksgiving 2024. As with any cultural holiday, it's up to the individual Satanists to decide what holidays they want to celebrate and how. Personally, I love Thanksgiving. I'm a lifelong New Englander, so it's always been part of my family celebrations. In the previous episode of Satansplain, I talked a little bit about the so-called 7 deadly sins, and talked in particular about 2 of them, anger and envy. But when it comes to Thanksgiving, 2 other sins of the 7 come to mind, and those would be gluttony and sloth. So I shamelessly celebrate both of those in my celebration of Thanksgiving. As for the remaining 3 sins of the 7, well, let's see, there's lust, of course, which I think I covered well in Satansplain episode number 69. Yes, I took advantage of that episode number for that topic. So maybe after this we'll do some episodes on pride and greed sometime in the future. I don't know, we'll see. But as for gluttony and sloth, well, as a Satanist, I have to say that these 2 sins can certainly lead to gratification. As we say in the Satanic Statements, we say in Satanic Statement number 8, about all of these so-called sins, these so-called 7 deadly sins, leading to gratification. And eating things for reasons other than pure survival really all comes down to indulgence. Life would be less enjoyable for me if I couldn't enjoy a great feast now and then. And as for sloth, well, I would say that we all need a break now and then for sanity's sake. Even if what you do for work is a work of passion, or you're a parent who says, well, I love my children more than anything, you still need some time to, fuck off once in a while. I know it's a cliche to use the phrase balancing work and play, but yeah, there it is. So I can see why Christians tried calling sloth a sin. No, you can't have time on your own, you sinner. You can't have time on your own without stress. That means you don't have the fear that we need to instill in you to keep you in line. You might also start daydreaming and thinking on your own. Well, we can't have that. Now, on the flip side of all that, I'll be in some Satanism forum and the topic of indulgence or the 7 deadly sins comes up. And there will be some new person there who wants to let us all know how deeply wise they are by saying, well, I suppose I believe in all that, but only in moderation. They're all bad when they're done in excess. Well, gee, no shit. Golly gee, thank you, Mr. Wizard. You're so wise and insightful. I'm sure none of the other Satanists here figured that out at all, what you just said. Yeah, Satan represents indulgence instead of abstinence. That's the Satanic Statement number 1, and we make it very clear in the Satanic Bible, however, that indulgence is not the same thing as compulsion. So when it comes to gluttony and sloth, if you're eating too much or slacking off too much to the point where the consequences don't feel good, then maybe it's a compulsion. Regardless, it's certainly not an indulgence. And if you didn't have the foresight to see the consequences before that, well, maybe you're exhibiting Satanic sin number 1, which is stupidity. So, by the way, if you're worried that too much gluttony is bad, and you want to keep that in check because you want to watch your figure, well, congratulations, you're using the sin of pride. Likewise, if you're worried that too much sloth will make you lose your job and prevent you from getting what you really want in the end, well, guess what's pulling you to keep that in check? Another sin. Greed. Well, I thought I would need a separate episode for Pride and Greed, but I guess I ended up mentioning both of them after all. Gluttony on Thanksgiving typically involves turkey, though, which brings us to the next topic, the main topic of this show, this particular episode of Satansplain, and that topic is Satanic Rule of the Earth number 10. I have gotten emails from at least a couple of different listeners asking me for my thoughts on Satanic Rule of the Earth number 10. One of them also additionally asked me about animal companions, and another listener asked me what my thoughts are on P.E.T.A, the organization, P.E.T.A, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. Well, back in Satansplain episode number 60, I focused on the 11 Satanic Rules of the Earth. I also addressed some of the questions and misconceptions I see coming up over and over again with those. So if you have general questions about the list, the 11 Satanic Rules of the Earth, or why we have it, I urge you to listen to that episode, if you haven't, Satansplain episode number 60. As I've said many times, Satanism is not a religion where there are simply no rules, and that anybody can do anything to anybody else for any reason. Satanism is not simply anything you want it to be. As with any ideology with a name, there's a set of principles that help define what it is and what it isn't. It's not so rigid of an ideology that there's no room for personal expression. It's not so rigid that every Satanist has to follow some oppressive rules or behavior that are restricting what they'd harmlessly like to do otherwise. But again, there's still enough of a working definition here to distinguish Satanism from not Satanism. Because if there weren't, the term Satanism would be meaningless. Some of you have heard me say this several times before, and I repeat it because it bears repeating. But for now, let's focus on rule number 10. Satanic Rule of the Earth number 10 says, do not kill non-human animals unless you are attacked or for your food. That seems very direct to me, very clear, direct language. So why is this rule here? I would say it's there for two reasons. One, so that when we run into people who claim that Satanism is about animal sacrifice, we can simply point out how our religion explicitly condemns that. It's one of our 11 rules. Not only that, but we can filter out the crazy people who do that sick sort of stuff and think that it has something to do with Satanism because the Christians told them it does. We don't want those people. But the second reason why we have Satanic Rule of the Earth number 10 is that there are good philosophical reasons within Satanism why we don't ritualistically sacrifice animals. This is explained in the Satanic Bible. Satanism is a religion that embraces the carnal rather than the spiritual, and it's also a religion where the God is the self. That is the God of Satanism, the self. So if you're ritualistically sacrificing an animal, well, what are you doing? You're symbolically killing the carnal, and you're also doing that to give your weak ego a false sense of superiority. So that's all about as anti-satanic as it gets. Now, on top of all this, a lot of Satanists, in my experience, are animal lovers. They're fascinated by animals. They have pets. They enjoy the companionship a pet can bring. A lot of Satanists find animals to be much more likable than humans on the whole, and I can't say I blame them. There are a lot of just really shitty, useless humans out there, and I see absolutely no shame in a Satanist, or even a non-Satanist, for that matter, preferring the company of a dog or a cat to their annoying human next-door neighbor. Having said all of that, though, I would caution that I think there are some practical limitations to this approach. I mean, it's certainly good to have some human friends. I'm reminded of something comedian Bobcat Goldthwait said, which was, animals may be our friends, but they won't pick you up at the airport. In fact, sometimes we gotta put the misanthropy on hold and work some lesser magic, you know what I mean? But we say in Satanic Rule of the Earth number 10, don't kill non-human animals unless you are attacked or for your food. If a wild animal were to attack me, and it came down to myself or the other animal being killed, well, I'm going to defend my life. I am more important. I am an animal myself, and that, in and of itself, is Satanic Statement number 7, stating that humans are animals. And with that comes my own carnal instinct of self-preservation. That also extends to the last part of Satanic Rule of the Earth, number 10, for food. I am an omnivore. I eat vegetables, but I also eat meat. Meat comes from animals. So like a lot of people, I eat animals. I take no shame in eating animals. I own a farm. I have raised animals for human consumption. I have culled chickens and quail for their meat. I didn't light candles or chant or do anything ritualistic in that process. It wasn't a sacrifice to Satan or some mystic bullshit like that. All it is that instead of buying chicken meat from a store or a restaurant, which came from a factory that processed the chicken, which came from some machine that killed the chicken, and, the chicken came from some other farm, well, what I'm doing is just cutting out the middle steps by buying, raising, and culling the chickens myself. I don't torture my livestock or make them go through painful living conditions. I don't inject them with hormones or anything like that. And when their time comes, it's a swift death for them. So as a Satanist, I have no guilt about raising my own meat like any other poultry farmer. Most people, I suspect, wouldn't be able to do that, and some of the more hardcore vegans use that as an argument. They'll say, well, the reason you don't hunt or slaughter your own chickens is because you know it's wrong. You can't bring yourself to do it, but you eat chicken, so you're a hypocrite. No, I don't think it's hypocritical to eat meat but not want to have anything to do with the culling process. If you don't want to have to tend to a live animal and deal with the blood and the gutting, removing the organs and the fur or the feathers and all that, especially when you can just go to a store or restaurant where that's already all taken care of, well, that seems reasonable to me. There are lots of things that may seem shocking or off-putting because we don't see it happening, at least not regularly, and we don't have to deal with it. But I don't think it's hypocritical to enjoy the benefits of not having to do it. I mean, sewage, for example, is disgusting. I wouldn't want to work in the sewage industry or the plumbing industry, but that doesn't make me a hypocrite for using toilets. Moving on, when it comes to hunting, this is where I have some different views. If you are hunting for food, well, as a Satanist, I have no objection to that in and of itself. Man, again, is an animal. Lots of animals hunt for their food. So if you want to use your gun or a bow or traps to go, get a rabbit or deer to eat, I don't see how that's any less moral than buying meat from the store that somebody else killed. Some hunters also just like the thrill of the hunt. Okay, I can see that. I can see how there's also some pride that comes with the self-sufficiency of obtaining your own food like this. I totally get that. When it comes to trophy hunting, however, that's where myself and many other Satanists would argue that's kind of going too far. Trophy hunting is hunting you do just so you can say you did it, and for really no practical reason otherwise. Church of Satan Magister Michael Rose wrote an essay about this topic, which was later published in his book Infernalia. You can buy that book online from Scapegoat Publishing. I've read some other essays of his here and there on Satansplain before. But if you're going to go and shoot a lion or a bear and stuff its head to mount to the wall and throw away the rest, well, I don't know what kind of victory you're trying to show the world. Now, going back to what I said about eating meat, does all of this mean that a Satanist couldn't be a vegetarian or a vegan? No, there are certainly some Satanists who are vegetarians or vegans. For them, it's not a matter of abstinence or being less carnal. These are Satanists who have decided personally that, for whatever reason, they don't want to eat meat. Maybe they see the meat industry as too cruel against animals. Maybe they feel we've reached a point in technology that we can survive without meat, so they opt for this route where animals don't have to be killed at all. Maybe they've come to the conclusion it's just healthier to be a vegetarian. Maybe some of them just sincerely don't like eating meat. Maybe they think it's gross. I don't know. I can't presume to know what the reasons are for every vegetarian Satanist, but I can say that vegetarian Satanists do exist, and that's fine. We don't have a dietary restriction or dietary demand in Satanism, and we acknowledge each other's right to choose in this regard. The Satanists who are vegetarians don't give me a hard time for being a vegetarian, and likewise I don't give them a hard time for being vegetarian. But there is an old joke that goes something like this. How can you tell whether somebody is vegan? And the answer is, oh, don't worry, they'll let you know. Which brings me to PETA. As I said earlier, somebody asked for my thoughts on PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. Well, let me first say this. I used to have one of those bumper stickers that said PETA, P-E-T-A, but instead of saying underneath People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, it said People Eating Tasty Animals. And I had that bumper sticker not because I'm pro-animal cruelty, but because I'm anti-smugness. I'm anti-self-righteous dogma. And I don't like the self-righteousness of groups like PETA, who want to guilt-trip me for eating meat. You know, go fuck yourself, PETA. You're just as intolerable and insufferable as some of the evangelical Christians. Furthermore, I have known many people, Satanists or not, who are most certainly big into animal rights. They're animal rights activists, and yet they still condemn PETA. They argue that PETA doesn't really do what they say they do. They say that some of the practices of PETA are questionable, and that in some cases their efforts even ironically hurt animals. Well, I'll leave it to you, the listeners, to go look up stories about their animal euthanasia programs or other crazy things they've done. In any case, rejection of PETA is certainly not synonymous with being pro-animal cruelty. I'd like to finish off this topic of Satanic Rule of the Earth number 10 and animal cruelty with some further philosophical thoughts on this topic. All the way back in episode number 1 of Satansplain, I talked about the difference between asking questions to gain knowledge and asking questions just to be a pest. And I'm sure somewhere out there there's somebody out there thinking, well, your Satanic Rule of the Earth number 10 says don't kill animals unless attacked on or for food. So does that mean Satanists can never call an exterminator for termites or swat a fly or a mosquito? I saw a Satanist do one of these things once, so you are hypocrites. Checkmate, I win. You know, there are idiots out there who have no life and go out to find faults like this in order to feel superior. It's so lame. As I keep saying, Satanism isn't a religion for people who need to be taken by the hand on everything, and our rules are not viewed as some sort of divine decree that overrides all human behavior and objective reality in all circumstances. So I don't know why some people think that a Satanist swatting a fly is a big gotcha that throws a wrench in the gears of our religion. You know, like it renders Satanic Rule of the Earth number 10 meaningless, and we don't know what to do with ourselves now. But let's examine this idea anyway. Why is killing an animal like a cat or a bear different than killing a fly? There's a quotation I saw online a few months back. The quotation was this: if you crush a cockroach, you're a hero. If you crush a beautiful butterfly, you are a villain. Morals have aesthetic criteria. A lot of people online have attributed that quotation to philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who was certainly an influence on Satanism. However, there is no evidence that he said that quotation. Somebody tweeted the quote back in 2012, and I've seen no evidence of the quote being older than that. Regardless, I like the quotation. And I think this quotation does bring up some interesting questions. Comedian George Carlin said in one of his books that if lobsters looked like puppy dogs, people wouldn't boil them alive for food. But since lobsters look like these giant red spiders out of some science fiction movie, then it's okay to kill them and eat them. Like I said, I have no shame about eating meat. I've certainly eaten lobster as well. But I do think there is something to be said about aesthetics here. I'm sure there are other factors at work here too. We don't think much about killing a mosquito or a spider. They're not only ugly, but they're small and pretty large in number. They're pests also. And when you kill them, you don't hear agonizing cries. We didn't grow up watching cartoons about some anthropomorphized mosquito being friendly and doing human things. Now compare all of this to killing a mouse or a cat or a bear or a monkey. I think even most vegans don't have a problem with killing life if it's in the form of bugs, or for that matter, mildew, bacteria, whatever. Somehow I doubt P.E.T.A spends much time protesting the stores that sell cockroach spray or wasp killing spray, for example. Now, another factor to consider in all of this is animal versus animal. Not just me, the human, as an animal eating meat, but to give you some more examples from my farm, just before I sat down to record this episode of Satansplain today, I looked out my window and I saw a fox running out towards the barn. Well, as much as I try to keep my chickens and ducks locked up within a perimeter to free range inside there, I have lost a few to foxes and coyotes. I live out in the country, and I even lost a barn cat to a fox after the cat lost a horrific fight to a fox one night and died the next day. But today I saw this fox running and wanting, of course, to defend my livestock and defend my lair from predators. I grabbed my rifle and ran out. The fox was scared off on its own by the time I got out there, but push comes to shove, I'm prepared to do what I have to do to defend my livestock. As I mentioned, I have barn cats. So barn cats are the same species of cats as your average house cat, but they live in the barn, not inside the house. And they're there to kill any mice or other rodents that get in, because it's cheaper than hiring an exterminator, even after you factor in the cost for cat food and kitty litter and all that. And even a house cat, though, will kill a mouse. Now, does this mean every cat owner is being cruel to mice as animals by having a mouse killer in the house? Well, I don't know about you, but I'd rather have cats than mice in my barn. So what's going on here with what seems to be a double standard on living things, and why some animals are more revered than others? I think there are several factors, but one of my own personal theories is that as humans, we are essentially biologically hardwired to care more about the familiar rather than the unfamiliar. It's a byproduct of evolution. I think that extends to how we look at other organisms in terms of how much they resemble humans. My theory is that the less an organism, or any inanimate object for that matter, resembles a human, the fewer reservations we humans tend to have about killing it. So an organism that has a face and 4 limbs and so on is going to be easier to relate to and sympathize with than an organism that doesn't have those traits. Dogs, for example, certainly, well, they don't look like humans on the whole, but they can sort of make facial expressions with, those ridges they have over their eyes that act like eyebrows, or baring their teeth, or a change in voice, change in posture. All this stuff conveys emotion. They can respond to noises as well. They can interact. All those things I just listed, well, you don't really get any of that from an insect. So, there's a lot more we can speculate on this, but for now, those are just my thoughts on animals and Satanic Rule of the Earth number 10. Let's take a break. You are listening to Satansplain.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
Do satanic cults lurk in the shadows? Can memories of satanic ritual abuse be repressed? Do exorcisms really drive out demons? And are those demons always possessing Zach Baggins? I'm JD Sword, the Satanic Skeptic. Join me on The Devil in the Details as I examine these questions and more, bringing a skeptical and satanic perspective to the paranormal. The Devil in the Details, available on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, and more.
Have you ever used a public toilet and noticed one of those dirty poems scrawled on the wall? Aren't they great? If you thought that sick shit was funny, you're gonna love this book series, Poems from the Bathroom Wall. These original poems are written in the same style and cover the same subject matter. Look these books up on lulu.com, that's LULU.com, and make sure that your filters are set to allow explicit content. Poems from the Bathroom Wall. Indulgence for the lowbrow connoisseur.
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. Visit the main website for the show at satansplain.com. There you can find every Satansplain episode. You can also listen to Satansplain on Spotify, YouTube, Audible, and a host of other places. If you are on social media, please give Satansplain a like and a follow, whatever the equivalent is, on Facebook, X, and YouTube. Likewise, if you're listening now on YouTube, don't forget to hit that like button for this episode. For all questions and correspondence, you can email me directly. The email address is bill@satansplain.com. And if you enjoy Satansplain and would like to show some support for the show, please go to the show's page on Locals. Point your web browsers to satansplain.locals.com. You can sign up for Locals for free, but you can also additionally become a paid subscriber there. We also have a merch store. You can go to store.satansplain.com for that. But thank you, as always, to all of you who support the show in one way or another. When you're done listening to Satansplain, you can check out my other podcast, The Devil's Mischief. That is my comedy and novelty podcast that I've been putting out for over 20 years. And I just pushed out a new episode recently for Thanksgiving. Go to radiofreesatan.com to hear that. Let's get to some listener mail. I have a satanic anecdote here from David, which of course means it's time for a satanic anecdote, or for short, a Satanecdote. So cue the Satanecdote theme song.
Satanic Anecdotes. Satanecdotes.
David writes, "Hello, Bill. Thank you for the undefiled wisdom. I had an experience where at the time during work, a coworker of mine asked me if I am a warlock. I had no knowledge of what a warlock was. The only knowledge I had about warlocks was from video games like the World of Warcraft. You know, the ones that look like little orcs and monsters. He then starts explaining how warlocks, you see, worship the devil and sacrifice babies. And he goes on to explain all of this satanic panicky stuff. I said, well, I would never do anything like that. My goodness. Well, fast forward literally 3 months from that day. Out of curiosity, I'm reading the Satanic Bible. I'm reading the book, The Satanic Warlock, as well. And now I'm proud to say I am a Satanist and becoming a warlock myself. I thought it was funny how he kind of opened the doors to this way of living with the intent of putting red "do not cross" tape across it. Well, thank you for that Satanecdote, David. A thing I've said about The Satanic Warlock, which is a book by Church of Satan Magister Bob Johnson, is that even if you are a male Satanist, I would say to first read The Satanic Witch before you read The Satanic Warlock. Even before The Satanic Warlock was ever written, I'd see way too many male Satanists who dismissed The Satanic Witch because they thought the book was written strictly only for women. And they said, well, I'll just wait until somebody writes The Satanic Warlock. No, I would always say that this was a bad approach. Most of the Satanic Witch is written for women, yes, but there is plenty in it that a male Satanist can use as well. If you've read the Satanic Bible, then you've read about the concepts of lesser magic and greater magic, and what that means in Satanism. Well, the Satanic Witch is the book expanding on lesser magic, and the Satanic Rituals is the book expanding on greater magic, and of course Satanic Ritual or ceremony in general. So that's how I would sum those two books up. I've got an email here from Vil. He was talking about the radio show Coast to Coast AM. He says that back when Art Bell was the host, granted it was a kooky kind of show, but still entertaining, and Art Bell would actually challenge his guests. And Vil now says he would describe the show as, quote, just a sales platform for conspiracy theorists and New Age neo-Wiccan crystal biters. But much to his surprise, he noticed that I was a guest on that show before. Now, Vil asks if there's a way to listen to the whole episode with me. If you pay for the subscription to the Coast to Coast AM archives, they give you access to the full episode. But Vil asks if there's another way to listen to the episode in full. And I told him that unfortunately, no, I'm sorry, I don't think there is. I did point him to Satansplain.com, where you can do a search for Coast to Coast, and you'll find a 25-minute sample from the interview that they made publicly available. So that's not even a third of the interview, I think, but I think that's also on Spotify and maybe some other places. Also, I gave Vil a link to an article I wrote for churchofsatan.com, just talking about my experience being on the show and my commentary on the callers who had called in. If you search churchofsatan.com for the word coast, you should probably be able to find it. Eric writes, I just wanted to say thank you for what you do with the podcast. As someone who spent about 2 years learning and researching Satanism, your show really helped fill in a lot of the blanks for me and ultimately helped me make my decision to join the Church of Satan as a registered member. I will spare you my lengthy origin story, as I'm sure you get a lot of that, but when I was young, I considered myself a Christian and was in a semi-successful Christian band. This was from the early to late 2000s. Fast forward to today, I could not be further removed from my former beliefs/life. This brings me to my question. I am becoming increasingly interested in applying for active membership in the Church of Satan, and I fully understand the process and how important honesty is. My concern is this: if you were to Google my full name, you would find search results regarding my old band, which, as I mentioned, was a Christian band, and I am not sure that it would work against my application for active membership. My question is, should I include this information with my application for the sake of transparency? I do not want to be erroneously labeled as a troll who wants to join for some kind of insincere reason. I am not sure if my concerns are unfounded, as I'm sure I am not the first former Christian to join the Church of Satan, but I wanted to reach out and ask. Again, thank you for doing your show. I continue to listen to it and find value in each and every episode. So I wrote back to Eric. I said, first of all, glad you enjoy the show. I'm happy to know that it helps you in your decision to join the Church of Satan. As for the active membership application, I told Eric, yes, you should just be honest about that for the sake of transparency. You would hardly be the first active member of the Church of Satan with a rather anti-Satanic religious background. We do have an expression in Satanism that says Satanists are born, not made. But this doesn't mean that you have to be born out of the womb believing in Satanism and never ever having any other religious beliefs in your life. No, what born not made means, at least to me, is that Satanism has to come naturally to you. This is not a religion for everybody, but for Satanists it really does just come naturally. It's not a religion that you can convert to by devotion. You know, you can't just come up to us and say, oh, I really, really want to be a Satanist. I'll do whatever it takes to convert to Satanism. Oh, you want me to believe that? Okay, I'll start believing that. You know, it just doesn't work that way. Obviously, I'm not accusing Eric here of doing that sort of thing, but, hopefully you get my point. And again, as I explained to Eric, there are Satanists who come from all sorts of religious backgrounds. I have met Satanists who never had any religious affiliation in their life before finding Satanism. I have met other Satanists who, like Eric, used to be Christian, and these have ranged anywhere from what I would call hereditary Christians, people who are Christians only because that's what their parents were, ranging from that to total born-again evangelical types. I have met other Satanists who had been occult dabblers or into New Age beliefs or something mystic like that. There are a couple of magisters I know in the Church of Satan who had even been members of the Temple of Set at some time in their lives. Yeah, years ago they were devil worshippers and caught up in all that esoteric nonsense until they finally came to the realization that it was all bullshit, and that there was only the carnal, not the spiritual, and found their way to Satanism. In fact, I myself was somebody who had a slew of religious affiliations before finding Satanism. And what happened to me personally is what you can sort of see described in the Satanic Bible in the chapter called The God You Save May Be Yourself. That chapter describes kind of an example, hypothetically, of what I went through. I went through some religion or another, denying my carnal nature and trying to rationalize away this skepticism and other anti-spiritual thoughts I had in the back of my head. So I was doing more and more mental gymnastics until I finally found myself in Satanism and dropped, the act. There were some other factors along the way, but the point here is that in Satanism, it's not about whatever irrational beliefs you may have had in the past. It's where you are now. Where you are now. If you are a Satanist, you may have had a long or short journey to get here, but you got here. That's the important thing. Let's end the episode here. Thank you for listening. Hail Satan.
You have been listening to Satansplain. For more information about the show, visit the official website at Satansplain.com. And for more information on Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode is copyright 2024, Magister Bill M.